All right, hello. I'm Dr. Kimberly Larson, Marvelous Minds in Glen Ellen. Welcome to the Glen Ellen Public Library. So I'm going to be talking tonight about neurodiversity, what it means, and most importantly, like, okay, if we know our child is neurodiverse, what do we do about that, right? A big focus of tonight is also going to be trying to look at neurodiversity from a little bit different perspective. Instead of a diagnosis, we're going to talk about a profile, a strengths and weaknesses profile. Instead of looking at a symptom, we're going to be looking at it as a weakness. And that way we can really focus on our children's strengths and using those strengths to help bolster the weaknesses. Come on in, have a seat. All right. So first, what is neurodiversity? This term was coined in the 90s by a sociologist, Judy Singer, who is on the autism spectrum herself. And she really didn't like the way that the idea of autism being a disorder, because anyone who knows somebody with autism knows that there's a whole lot of strengths that come with it too, right? We're not just talking about symptoms or something that needs to be fixed, but rather we're talking about a constellation of strengths and weaknesses, right? So she was pretty influential in the area. Yeah, brain differences are just that, they're differences, right? We all have different skill sets, we have different weaknesses. That's what we're looking at with neurodiversity. So not only does the concept of neurodiversity help us look at neurodiverse folks more positively, but it's really done a lot for the people who are neurodiverse to look at themselves and to create a more positive identity, right? I'm not just, you know, an ADHD kid, but I have ADHD superpowers also, okay? So some of the disorders, I'm going to be talking about disorders because that's kind of how we learn about them for our children. But some of the ones that we're going to be talking about tonight include dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, Dyscalculia, ADHD and other attentional difficulties, autism spectrum, and Tourettes. All of these are diagnoses that are considered neurodiverse. All right, so just as every neurodivergent profile, which is like a diagnosis, ADHD would be a diagnosis, but the profile of strengths and weaknesses, just as every profile has its weaknesses, it also has its strengths. And I like to talk to families about these strengths as their superpowers, right? We all want to have superpowers, and kids really love the idea that they have these special attributes. Every person, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent, we are all unique, right? Like fingerprints, our brains are all different. So, although like today we're going to be talking about general trends, obviously not everybody is going to have the same strengths and the same weaknesses. Some kids with ADHD are super creative, right? Not everybody is going to be. You can have ADHD and not be creative, but in general scope, that's what we see. So our strengths are our superpowers. Okay, so this is a lot on this slide. We're going to come back to it a lot, but the idea of this is each of these areas on the outside are different disorders or different diagnoses. All the little words that are combining them, those are commonalities. So my job as a neuropsych is to look at a child and look at all their strengths and their weaknesses and their history and everything, and try to like narrow that into the best fit of a diagnosis. That's how our medical system works, right? Unfortunately, in the real world, we have difficult difficulties with organization, memory, concentration, time direction, perception, sequencing, and so on and so on and so on, that are common to all of these diagnoses, right? So where we'd like to bring our kid in and say, hey, what's going on? So we can help him. We don't always have a cut and dry answer, right? Health insurance, schools oftentimes need a diagnosis. They need a code under which to give you the treatment that you need or to pay for the treatment that you need, but it's not always as cut and dry as that. Okay, so we'll start with ADHD. Everybody knows ADHD, right? We have children who struggle with things like attention, hyperactivity, poor time management skills. They're impulsive. They can be super restless and get out of their seats. Okay, they talk too much. They interrupt, right? Like we all kind of have a picture of ADHD. So what we don't always think about is their superpowers. So kids who have ADHD and adults who have ADHD tend to be very imaginative. They're creative. That makes them good problem solvers, right? These are kids who will look at a problem and see it from a different perspective, right? Fast forward 20 years, your ADHD kid is looking for a job. That's a marketable skill, right? Being able to look at the situation from a different perspective and problem solve. That's kind of like what all of us employers are looking for, okay? Compassion, that's pretty amazing, right? We all want our children to be compassionate. Sense of humor, one of the reasons I went into this field is because kids are weird and they're hilarious, right? Some of these ADHD kids are like the best people that I've ever worked with, right? They make my job fun. They have great memories. When you think about neurodiversity, not just ADHD, but anybody, is you have a set of weaknesses that you have to overcome, right? You have to compensate in some ways. So your superpowers come from those compensatory strategies, right? You miss a ton of information that's coming in at you when you have ADHD. So you learn to compensate, and these kids grow up having pretty darn good memories. Observational skills, again, they miss a lot of details. They miss a lot of stuff. And so over time, they figure out how to catch on to those details and how to see things that other people don't see. Multitasking, I'm on the fence about that one. Kids with ADHD, they learn to multitask because they have to. Laser focus. Anybody who has an ADHD child at home and has watched them build a Lego set or play a video game knows what I'm talking about here. This is hyper focus. This is a really amazing skill when it comes to studying for a college class or preparing a presentation for a job, right? Like having that laser focus is excellent. Endless energy. I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation with parents and gone, man, I wish I had the energy my kid does, right? Like they really do have boundless energy. They're passionate. What they love, man, they love, and you know it. They have a strong moral compass, and they tend to be more accepting of others than neurotypical children. Most kids who are neurodivergent end up having more compassion and acceptance and tolerance for differences because that's how they learned. All right, so here's our crazy slide again. So we just went from ADHD over here. Now we are going to dyspraxia. So dyspraxia is a little less well-known than ADHD. It means difficulty with purposeful movement. So if I go to grab my water bottle, I might miss it, or I might exert too much force on it, and so it pushes out, and I miss the whole thing. It means that let's see, kids who are trying to learn to write, if they have dyspraxia, that's going to be really difficult for them because The brain is trying to say, okay, you're going to pick up the pencil with this much pressure at this much angle, and then you're going to turn your hand, you're going to get the paper. Like there's this whole sequence of events that happens when we do stuff like this that we're not even thinking about, right? But somebody with dyspraxia, that's going to be really, really hard. Okay, everything they do is going to be that much harder. This is considered a motor issue, but it really affects a lot more areas. So kids with dyspraxia, their superpowers, they tend to be really good leaders. They've learned all sorts of ways to get over stuff and to help others. They're crazy empathic. They're, again, great problem solvers. They have to be, right? All these kids with neurodivergent profiles, they have to be good problem solvers. These kids tend to be really motivated, creative. Again, the strategic thinking and original thinking, great, again, marketable skills. We'll talk about that a little bit later. These kids are really hardworking and they're determined. Here's our crazy slide again, just to, again, here's our dyspraxia. DCD is developmental coordination disorder. That's what it's called in the current nomenclature. We use the DSM-5. It is a tool that we have. It is not a perfect tool. I think dyspraxia says a lot more than developmental coordination disorder. Like it tells me as a clinician more of what I'm looking at. Dyslexia, okay? Little more known than, say, the dyscalculia or dyspraxia. This is difficulty with reading. So kids with dyslexia, they not only have trouble learning how to read, but they also often have difficulties with some visual perception, which affects other areas. They often have trouble with language and I lost my train of thought. But dyslexia kids, their superpowers, they tend to really do a great job with narrative memory, which is if I tell you a story, you can tell it to me right back, right? They remember things in sequence. They remember contextually how things go. So these are great learners when somebody is lecturing, right? These are kids who are going to do great with that kind of auditory memory. Puzzle solving skills. These are typically kids who have great quantitative reasoning. They do really well with higher level math skills. They can engage in simultaneous thinking. They have to, right? Because when you think about reading, there's a visual component to reading. There's also an auditory component to reading. So if you're struggling, and usually it's one or the other is the greater deficit, but to a point, each piece of reading is going to be more difficult. And so these kids learn how to focus on this part of the sound base of reading and the visual part of reading. And so their brains learn to kind of like multitask in that way. Spatial reasoning, again, this is another skill that's great in math. Conversational skills. People who have trouble reading tend to have better verbal expression. They're good conversationalists. They have great social perception. They're creative. They're empathic. They're imaginative. Abstract thinking is usually stronger. Problem solving skills, again, all of these kids tend to have better problem solving skills, critical thinking, and language comprehension. We're going to go to the crazy slide. And I think Dyscalculia is next, but we'll see. Nope, autism. So the DSM-5 tells us that Asperger's, poof, doesn't exist anymore. Asperger's is very much a thing. It is so when we talk about autism, we talk about this giant spectrum of capabilities. On one end, we have children who struggle to verbalize their needs. On the other end, we have like the people running our world, okay? Crazy, smart, brilliant thinkers. They look at the world differently. They create things, right? So this is this giant spectrum. Asperger's tends to be kids who desperately want socialization. They struggle with social nuance. Their language skills are typically pretty good. Their visual skills are usually excellent. They tend to have early reading skills. But they are one kind of constellation on this larger spectrum. There's been a lot of research, especially in the last like 20 years, about the superpowers of autism because of the whole idea of neurodiversity. Well, what's the good that comes with the not so good, right? What's the good stuff that comes with these struggles that these children have? Oftentimes, they're hyperlexic, meaning they read earlier than neurotypical children. They see the world differently. Yes?
I'm having a little bit of trouble reading the background. Can you go through, there's a lot on the screen, can you go through? I think
Yeah.
You were starting to, but I was hoping you were going to go through.
Yes, absolutely. The only one I'm not getting in deep is this one that I keep showing. But yeah, absolutely. So kids on the spectrum, they tend to be quick learners, right? If you think about the way that they are seeing the world, it is different. So they're not going to incorporate and encode and recall information the same way that a neurotypical person will. They tend to be visual learners. These are the kids who, if you're lecturing and lecturing and lecturing, right, they need some visual cues. We can't just tell these kids to run upstairs and do all these things. You know, maybe we need to have a picture of what it looks like when I get ready for school, right? I got my boots, I got my hats, I got my gloves, I got my backpack, I got my water bottle, right? Maybe a picture is going to be more helpful than saying, hey, Johnny, go get this and this and this and this and this, right? These are visual kids. They're logical thinkers, okay? If it doesn't make sense, if it's too abstract or it's too like soft kind of, it's not going to work for them. Logic is key. These children are often gifted in science, engineering, math. Remember, these kids tend to think technically and logically. Their long-term recall is amazing. This is where I have parents saying, I was really tired one day and I promised that I would, you know, take him to Disneyland if he would just eat his damn peas, right? And the kid remembers like 4 years later, I ate a pea, Mom. Like, we're going to Disneyland. They remember everything. They're precise and detail oriented, right? They see all the little pieces that make up the whole. These kids are honest and reliable. And that sounds like it's kind of like a weird thing to say, but children on the spectrum tend to be very rule oriented and they have this high sense of morals. So they look at situations in a very black and white way. Sometimes that gets them, I was not in trouble, but it gets them where it's difficult to navigate social relationships or more abstract concepts. But where it's really cool is they have this just innate sense of right and wrong. Sometimes that can get in the way of things, seeing the gray in situations, but you end up with people who are so honest and reliable that they do what they're told, and they do that over and over because that's the right thing to do. They tend to be very dependable with schedules and routines. These are children who need structure and thrive on structure. So if you know what you're going to be doing, when you're going to be doing it, and how, and you let them know, you have just decreased their anxiety tenfold. They tend to have a great sense of direction and spatial awareness. They tend to be on time because, again, you've got your structure and it's the right thing to do is to be punctual, right? They adhere to rules. When they're motivated, their concentration is really good. This is like the hyper focus that we talked about with ADHD, right? If I have something I am motivated to learn or is enjoyable to learn, like that focus is there. There tends to be a drive for perfection and order. If you tell them to do something the right way, they'll do it the right way. That should say alternative problem solving. These are the people that genuinely change the world, right? They say Einstein was on the spectrum. That kid got in so much trouble when he was little, and they thought he was stupid, and just got a lot of grief for being like, you know, little boy Einstein. And he kind of revolutionized like the way we think about stuff. If you look at Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, right? These guys have looked at the world and been like, nah, I'm going to do it my way, right? And it's really worked. These are people who are on the spectrum. And there's a sense of wonderment. Everything is new. Nothing is taken for granted. There is a genuine, when you can take away some of the anxiety that comes with it, there's this genuine sense of wonderment. You know, everything is exciting and new. And yes, that breeds anxiety, but the other side of it is just beautiful. All right, here's our crazy slide. I have no idea what's coming next now. Dysgraphia. Dysgraphia is difficulty with written expression. These are kids who they can tell you a fantastic story, but they can't put it on paper. Even if they have decent fine motor, onto the page is brutal, right? Sometimes we teach these kids to type, thinking we got it, you know, or we use voice, right? Voice helps a little bit, the typing, not so much, right? It's that process of going from the internal like monologue into getting it expressed on the paper, whether it's typing or handwriting. Kids with dysgraphia, again, great problem solvers. Like the kids with dyslexia, they tend to be really good at that social perception, the conversation skills, right? I can't express myself this way, but when we're talking, I can absolutely be able to have my needs met, to, you know, find more about you. So these are really good social kids, problem solving. They tend to be great storytellers, right? Verbally, they can tell you exactly what they want to say. They tend to have good memorization and detailed recall. And they're listening. You know, kids who struggle with writing, they tend to be good listeners, right? Here's our crazy slide. Tourette's. So interestingly, we don't always think about Tourette's disorder as kind of part of this constellation of neurodiversity. But according to research, it is. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. If you don't know what Tourette's is, it is a tic disorder. People with Tourette's tend to have both verbal and motor tics. A motor tic could be anything from doing like a finger movement to one of these, or having like an eye twitch. Verbal tics can be like clearing your throat or saying a word. We see like in the movies, somebody with Tourette's, and it's very dramatic and very extreme. The movies. Yes, it can happen that way, but typically it's a mixed bag of the verbal and motor tics. And they change over time. That's something that parents should know. Like if I'm doing this for a year, that may change the next year and I may have a totally different tic and this one's gone away. Totally normal. So what are the superpowers in Tourette's? Cognitive control. You have somebody who is spending all of their energy trying not to do something that their body's trying to make them do. That's control, right? These are kids that work so hard at that, and they develop these skills that when you look at the research, these adaptive behaviors, they're able to overcome so much more like cognitive inhibition because they're practicing it literally all the time, right? Information processing, they were talking about having like like shortened information processing pathways because again of the level of control that they have. These people tend to be goal oriented. Everything takes longer, right? Because I'm fighting my tics every step of the way. I'm kind of fighting myself. And so I see that goal and I'm going to go for it as quickly as I can. So these are children who really tend to just go for it. Verbal processing tends to be better. Perceptual skills, again, the creativity, energy, they're task oriented. They tend to be funny and they tend to be empathic because it's not easy growing up with a tic disorder. So they tend to really be compassionate for others. All right, there it is. Dyscalculia. This is math. Struggles with math, struggles with number sense, struggles with quantitative reasoning. Okay. We don't hear about this very often. We just get a lot of, oh, I'm not a math person, right? But people who have dyscalculia, who really struggle with math concepts, they tend to be not only very strategic, but also very creative. They have to think around the way that they're being taught to do something in school, and they have to think around it and oftentimes come up with some pretty cool strategies. They tend to be very practical. These are hands-on people. These are the kids that are going to grow up doing some sort of like hands-on profession that's going to work really well for them. They tend to be good with language, intuitive thinkers. Again, social perception tends to be really good with kids with dyscalculia. All right. So great, my kid has superpowers, right? What are we going to do about it? So in my world, when a parent comes to me or a child comes to me, there's always this like three-pronged pathway that I talk about. The kid is at school most of the day. That's their job, right? They're at home and then they go out into the community. So if we need adaptation, we need supports, we need structure or whatever it is we need, we're going to need it in these different places and they're going to look different, right? Your kid is never the same person, no matter how neurotypical they may be. They are not the same person in your home as they are at school or at their friends' houses, right? Okay, so first we'll talk about home. First thing that you can do, no matter what your kid's strengths and weaknesses are, is educate yourself. We don't want to focus on the negative, right? We want to make sure that they know what their strengths are, that we know what their strengths are. There are a lot of websites, some of which I have on the last slide, that are amazing at explaining what these different diagnoses are and kind of how to look at it from a more positive lens. You want to reevaluate your expectations. This is something that as a parent, I had to do early, and I am still continuing to do this all the time, right? We have expectations for what parenthood is going to be like. I haven't met anyone yet that was right. But oftentimes when we have kids who have struggles, we really need to redefine what we think is going to be appropriate in our house, what are going to be the, what our values are, and what that's going to look like in the real world. So you want to make a plan, okay? Start by identifying the challenges. When I have a parent come in and talk to me, and we're going to set up a plan, right? I want you to tell me the first three things, or the hardest three things. If I had a magic wand and I could change those things, what would they be? That's where you're going to start your plan. You cannot do everything at once. You'll have a laundry list of things you want to change, right? You have a laundry list of questions. Focus on what is the most important to you, right? It might not be academics. It might not be hygiene. It might not be what it is for somebody else, and that doesn't matter. The whole point of making a plan is to make everyone's lives easier and more pleasant, right? We want to spend our free time with our kids, enjoying them, not fighting with them, not holding them down, not being sad for them and their challenges, right? We want to take as much time as we can to love them and play with them and have fun, okay? So oftentimes that really comes down to kind of reevaluating what it's going to look like. You want to teach missing skills. So some skills come naturally to people. There are people who are great spellers, right? Never have to learn how to spell things, never have to learn the rules, right? And then there are people who can't spell to save their lives, very intelligent people who rely on spell check, right? So if your kid is struggling with something that you think should, right, be an easy thing, right? Back it up. Maybe it's not an easy thing for them, and maybe it's just a skill that we can teach, okay? And this could be something as simple as, look at me when I talk to you, right? Or pick the toy up that you just knocked on the floor, right? Don't just walk away from it. So sometimes just like explicitly teaching something can make a huge difference. You want to identify your family's values, your rules. What are our house rules? And sometimes those are going to change. What are your expectations? And then what are the reinforcements for those expectations being met or not met? I am not saying punishments, right? I'm not saying consequences. I love the word consequence in my house. My kids love it too. But your idea of reinforcement, sometimes we really need to shift how we do that. You want to catch your kids being good. You reinforce that behavior. The chance of them doing it again because you gave them attention and you've reinforced that, chances are going to increase. As opposed to they do something bad or wrong and now you punish them, you've given them attention. So even though they got punished, they still got attention, right? So we really want to kind of switch the focus onto reinforcing the good behaviors because they will happen more. Have family meetings, like we're all in this together, right? Talk to your kids about their challenges. Talk to the kids about their superpowers. Talk to the siblings, right? Grandma nannies, have grandma be a part of the conversation. Nothing's harder than having multiple adults responsible for the same kid and having 3 different ways of dealing with things, right? It's really important to be consistent on the same page. And then you execute the plan. And then you go, well, whoa, that didn't work, right? And then you start over. This is an ongoing process, okay? And as soon as they grow and learn something new, then you got to start over. And that's okay, right? Because we're all learning as we go through this. Don't forget to focus on the relationships, right? Parent-child, parent-parents, right? We want to make sure that all the work that we're doing to make sure that their sensory needs are being met, or that they're not being hyperactive, or that they're getting their homework done, right? Like all of that stuff is so important. Sometimes we lose our connections. That's number one. And then don't forget self-care, right? Which part of focusing on your relationships can be self-care, right? We cannot care for others if we're not caring for ourselves. Think about in the airplane, right? Who gets the oxygen mask first? You do, because if you pass out, you can't help your kids. It's the same idea. We need to make sure that we're getting self-care. All right. So we talked a little bit about things to do at home. Now we're going to talk about school. All right. And I would imagine there's going to be a lot of questions on this. Not that you guys can read it, but there is a link in here to understood.org, which it gives you a template letter to request information from your school. If you're going to be going through, I can give you copies of the slides. You can take a picture if you want to, but I can make this available to everybody. The first thing you do when your kid has challenges and you want help at school is to let the school know, right? you should do it in written format. There's a template that you can print up and use right on this website. They have 60 days. The school has 60 days to respond to you. Now, depending on how they can look at 60 days as business days or calendar days. There's little wiggle room on that. But so you've got these 60 days and you're like, that's 2 months in my kid's life, right? That's like a big chunk of time. So in the meantime, what can you do? Ask the school, hey, what are they already doing, right? Chances are somebody's also seen something that your kid needs help with, right? Are they engaging in RTI? That's a tiered system of intervention that they start at one tier, and if your child doesn't do so well here, and that would be like in classroom, small group kind of stuff typically, if they don't do well there, they go down to the next level. Now they've got some more interventions. If your child doesn't do well, then they go into the bottom level where they have even more resources. Maybe they're being taken to the resource room and they're getting more one-on-one or smaller group intervention. But you want to talk to the school and see, are they doing these things already? Talk to the teachers, even before you worry about a 504 plan or an IEP. There's all sorts of informal accommodations that teachers make every day for kids, and they may already be doing some of them for your child, right? So these are things like preferential seating. If I'm the teacher and I'm at this part of the room and my kid can't focus and needs some reminders, I want my kid right there, right? It's not always going to be the front of the room. Now we have teachers that are walking all over. Maybe we have a board on the back of the room and they've got, something else over here, and they've got, they're moving around. So we ask for, the kids move around during the class time. Make sure that your child is going to be somewhere near the teacher or somewhere away from distractions, right? If there's a gerbil in the classroom on a wheel, right? We don't want our kid over there. If there's a door with a big window, we don't want our kid over there, right? So stuff like that is super easy. We just, ask to be seated somewhere else. We don't need a plan to tell us that. Having fidgets. Everybody has fidgets these days, right? Kids who need them, kids who don't need them. Different fidgets do different things. If you are like, we've tried fidget spinners and they don't work. Yeah, they're a crappy fidget. They don't work for most kids. But there are a lot of different manipulatives that we can use that can help your kid just kind of stay focused, help regulate them just because they've got a little thing in their hand, right? You don't need an IEP to have a fidget. Check-ins and checkouts. A lot of teachers are going to do this anyway. Just at the beginning of the day, a quick check-in, do you have the stuff that you need? Did you get a good night's sleep? Sometimes it's just a matter of connecting with the kids so that they feel like warm and welcome and ready for the day. And checkouts, do you have what you need for homework for tonight? Or don't forget to bring this permission slip home, or again, maybe it's just a bit of connection that they need in order to make the transition from school to home without dysregulating, right? Because sometimes just that transition is hard. So, okay, so those are things that you can do like in the meantime while you're waiting for this meeting. So if the school says that they see trouble too, they're going to do an evaluation. The school may say, no, your child is doing fine. They're average across the board. We don't see what you're seeing at home. We don't see here. You can get a private evaluation. You can talk to somebody like me, a neuropsychologist who can do testing, or if it's speech related, a speech and language pathologist. If it's sensory related, you could see a private occupational therapist. There's a lot of professionals out there that can help kind of nail down like, what is it that you're seeing? What's the source of this? So if the evaluation is denied, you can also dispute it. A lot of parents don't know that this is this is something you can do. There are educational advocates out there. They're like the original mama bears. No offense, papa bears out there, but you know, these are people who go to bat for you with the school and try to get everybody on the same page. Don't be afraid to ask your child's support team at school to communicate with outside providers, right? So this, I think, is really important, and I don't think it's utilized that much. If I'm working with a child or I'm working with a family and I want to create a plan for some behavioral stuff that's going on or regulation issues, right? I want to talk to their teacher. I want to talk to their speech path. I want to talk to their OT or their pediatrician, right? You have a team around your child. Those people should be communicating. I want to talk to those people. I don't, it's not a hardship for me to reach out to other professionals to make the best plan for your child, right? Like we're all in this together. We all want the same thing. And I think a lot of times we don't want to like rock the boat, or we don't want to ask too much, or whatever it is, but we're here for you and your family. And I have rarely come across a teacher that wasn't super excited to talk to a therapist or a neuropsych or a speech path. You know, they're like, oh my gosh, great. What can we do to help? Right? Okay. So that's home and school. And now we're going to talk about in the community. It is okay to accept help. If your sister-in-law or your neighbor or the weird lady down the street says, you know, hey, it looks like you got your hands full. You know, can I grab something at the store for you? Or I'm going to Costco. Do you need anything? Can I babysit? It's okay to say, yeah. This is hard work. Parenting is hard work. Parenting kids with superpowers is really hard work. Don't be afraid to ask for help, and certainly don't be afraid to accept it. Join support groups. There are so many like amazing Facebook groups on like special needs parenting, like town by town, diagnosis by diagnosis. Like there's millions of them out there. You can find a lot of support and a lot of ideas. I've gotten some of my best like clinical ideas from parents, not from textbooks, not from other doctors, but from parents. They're like, I tried this weird thing and it totally worked, right? That's great. You guys can tap into that by talking to these other parents. Choose your treatment team and build a treatment plan. And again, don't be afraid to ask your pediatrician, hey, I'm working with this therapist. Can you touch base with them? Like before we talk about, you know, an invasive procedure or medication or whatever, like let's make sure that we're all on the same page. It's super, super important. If you are one of those families where your kid has so many different treatments throughout the week and you find yourself driving all over the place all the time, make sure that your real life is built into that too. Sometimes we don't need to do everything at once. We can prioritize, or we can combine services. There's a lot of creativity out there, and it doesn't always have to be the first way that it's presented, okay? Don't be afraid to ask questions and make it work for your family. Okay, so I'm gonna touch on this super quick because we only have like 10 minutes left. But is neurodiversity a marketable skill? Neurodiversity isn't a skill in and of itself, but yes, there is just oodles of research and resources coming out. Microsoft has an autism hiring program. SAP has this program called Autism at Work. These big companies are literally like focused on people with neurodiverse brains and trying to like snatch them up out of school. The universities are building programs for neurodiverse students because they know these are the great thinkers. These are the kids that are going to change everything, right? So instead of going, oh man, how are we going to get our kid through high school? What kind of job are they going to have out there, right? Like once they get to the real world, what's this going to look like? If we foster their superpowers for the first, 18 years, they're going to be taking care of us, right? These are kids who are going to have amazing marketable skills. So this slide, I'm not going to read through it and waste time. You guys can read through it later if you want. And there are some typos. But basically, these are quotes that I found from hiring managers and HR people who specifically focus on hiring neurodivergent adults. And it's all the wonderful things that they say. These people know what their strengths and weaknesses are. It's built from a lifetime of creating workarounds, right? There are many gifts, but the greatest gift they possess is stellar imaginations and incredible creativity, right? These are people out there hiring adults that are looking for your kids' superpowers. So here's a couple websites that I highly recommend. Understood.org is amazing. There's a couple on neurodiversity. LDA America is learning disabilities. So is LDA Online. Chad is ADHD. And like I said, don't underestimate the power of social media. And my daughter found for me, this is the neurodivergent flag. Everybody gets a flag these days. And so this is the new one out there. I love it. Super cute. All right. And this is my favorite superhero. That's my little Thor. Questions. If people want to type into the chat, any questions? You guys have any questions? You can ask them out loud.
Questions you have for someone who has a preschooler going into kindergarten, you know you should have an IEP, but you're trying to navigate that process, and your child is not flagged as autistic but has sensory processing.
So sensory processing disorder is a diagnosable condition. And I believe you can get an IEP for sensory processing disorder. I think it comes under like other health impairment is the category. I could be wrong on that. I don't know all the school stuff. But I know that I've got kids out there with accommodations for SPD. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, what we were told is that it's normally global developmental delay,
Mhm.
not a because of the DSM-5 being changed,
Yeah.
sensory processing, you're kind of in this gray area. And so if you don't qualify in two things, you can be flagged, but you don't speak and else.
So yeah, it can come under global developmental delay. The other way to do it is other neurodevelopmental disorder, and then you put with impairment in, and then you can list out, sensory integration, fine motor, whatever else that your child is struggling with. So those are two ways that I might be able to get it in there. Sorry. Did you have a question come in? Okay.
Does this therapy work for all ADHD kids? I have a 6-year-old with ADHD.
Okay, so does therapy work for all ADHD kids? No, nothing works for every kid of any category. Depending on what your specific child needs is how we want to create their therapy plan, right? If your child is super restless and hyperactive, and you can't get them to sit down and have dinner, right? So your child, you're going to want to work on some more like physiological regulation stuff, maybe mindfulness, maybe yoga. Those are going to be things that will help just kind of calm the body and regulate. OT is really helpful for that. There's one of the things I was going to tell you guys earlier, the idea of interoception. Kelly Mahler came up with just like 10 years ago or something, this idea of interoception, and it's the body's kind of like emotional, like physio-emotional response, right? It's how we regulate our bodies. And there's this entire curriculum that she's developed for little kids. So it'd definitely be something to look into. I can share with you after the details. You know, but so a child who's like hyperactive and impulsive might benefit from that sort of treatment right away. Another child who maybe just like has the worst time management, they lose everything, they do their homework but forget to hand it in, right? That child is going to benefit more from like executive function training, you know, and depending on the age of your child and where they're at and where their challenges are, that, you know, it's going to look different over time. Kids with ADHD often have issues with kind of social, like picking up on social cues, some of the nuance in social interactions. And so, you know, maybe they're the loud kid. And so other children kind of tend to back away. They don't get invited to birthday parties, right? Which always makes us feel terrible for our kids before they go on to the next thing. I hope that answered the at-home question.
What can you share about kids that are twice exceptional and 2E and take the timing of the neuropsych on that? Is it first to third grade? Is it younger?
So 2E kids are amazing. They have some of the coolest brains on earth. So for people who don't know what 2E is, it means you're twice exceptional. So these are children who are intellectually gifted, but who also have challenges like a learning disorder or ADHD or something else, putting them on the neurodivergent spectrum, so to speak. So in a neuropsych evaluation, you can, I mean, that's part of it. That would come up on the profile. You would see that if a child is 2E. When is the best time to do that? It really depends on what are the challenges that you're seeing and why do you need like a neuropsych at this time. Anytime a kid is 6 or under, I really want to talk to the parents before I say, yeah, let's go do a test, because it might be that we want to, you know, maybe do some treatment, do some therapy first, get some skills under their belt, and then see what it looks like buying us 6 months. Because at you know, in early childhood, 6 months of development, you're looking at 2 different kids. Right? So sometimes we just need to buy a little bit of time to get a better answer. The younger they are, the more kind of amorphous your neuropsych scores are going to be, right? If you have to pee really bad and you're doing a working memory test, you're not going to do well, right? The older you are, the more likely you're going to be like, I have to go to the bathroom, right? That's not the only reason, but it's, you know, it gets tricky the younger that they are to get like definitive results. Any other questions coming in? Okay. Yeah, I was go for it.
What are some of the biggest mistakes parents make? Things that you heard throughout your career?
Focusing on our mistakes. We're parents. We are going to screw up, right? We're human beings. Not listening to your kid. Oftentimes your kids know more about themselves than you think they know. They don't always have the language to express it, right? But our kids teach us things about themselves in other ways other than saying things, right? Every behavior has a purpose, right? If I am yelling at you. I might be trying to avoid a situation, right? I don't want to go to my room, right? I might be angry and not know how to say, Mom, I'm angry. And so I'm yelling. It might be because I need your attention. And the only way I can get you to turn around because you're, cooking and doing all this other stuff is if I yell, then you turn around, you give me attention, right? So I can be doing the same behavior for 3 different reasons, 10 different reasons, right? So if we try to listen and watch our kids and observe them and try to figure out what the purpose is for their behavior, they're going to teach us a lot. Because then you ask the question, well, okay, how can you get my attention without yelling? How can you avoid this situation without yelling, right? How do we get to, if you have a chore that you have to do, but it's really hard for you to do it right now, is it a time of day issue? Is it going to be easier for you to do that chore, before your nap or when you first wake up in the morning? If we really watch and observe, we can figure out a lot about why our kids are doing the things they're doing.
Kind of follow up on that. Our son sometimes just going out the door getting show up is a really hard thing. Trying something new, and some days it's not a problem. Some days it's a complete. Like today, he was hiding under a chair. Did not want to go to music class. We had that problem with sports. Other times he totally wants to go. Any suggestions on that front where it's kind of out of nowhere, like 5 minutes, and it's like a light switch went on. I don't want to go, and just
So I would say, first, consistency. So have his stuff, like his physical stuff, in the same place all the time. Give him warnings. In an hour, we're leaving for music. In 10 minutes, we're leaving, right? So he's getting ready for the idea. He's used to hearing the time warnings. If he needs to have something with him, that's to help him transition, from home to the car, from car to music or whatever, maybe he has something like that. Consistency is really important. There might be something that you're doing in the environment that he doesn't like, but you don't even realize that it's different from day to day. Maybe he didn't have a snack first, and he needs to know that after snack, I go to music, right? And just changing up those little things that we don't even think about, that might be super distressing because that's not the way it's supposed to be, right? Think about when we were talking about the neurodivergent brain and things that they're good at, right? Structure, consistency, rule following, right? A lot of these kids just need to know what to expect. They need to know what it's going to be like. So sometimes, especially if you have an anxious kid, letting them know exactly what something is going to be like, right? So we're going to go to music class. We're going to see, Miss Jenny, and the piano is going to be out, and it's, we're going to be in the same blue room. And then afterwards, we'll go to Walgreens and get a popsicle. I don't know, but you know what I'm saying? Like building in the whole routine with a reinforcement, right? I know that you can do this. We're going to have so much fun. And when you show Miss Jenny how much you've been practicing, then, we're going to have a treat, or, get a sticker for your chart or whatever, whatever behavioral reinforcement you're working with. Did you have a question? Okay. Oh, are we out of time? All right. Well, thanks so much, people at home, for listening. I'm Dr. Kim at Marvelous Minds, and thank you guys for coming in on this cold night. I appreciate seeing faces and not being in my kitchen doing this. With my kids walking by going, can I have a snack? That's usually when you see me kind of going like this, that's, or I get a text like, can I have the buffalo wings or whatever? Stop texting me about food. But, all right. Well, thanks so much, Melissa.